Welcome, dear scholars and fellow philosophers, to my award-winning podcast, Behind the Dialogues. As our longtime listeners know, I'm your host, Aristotle, and today we have a very special guest joining us today. Why don't you just introduce yourself?
What's up? I'm Sextus. I'm a skeptic through and through, and I don't mean that dogmatically. A skeptical ability is the ability to set in opposition appearance and ideas in any manner whatsoever.
Thank you for coming. I'm so glad you're here.
Of course.
Before we really get into this, let's review the inquiry of today. If you recall from last episode when I spoke with Plato, we sort of left off when I began to tease my opinions on eudaimonia. So that's why today I'm going to address and unpack what I believe is the relationship between virtue and living a good life.
And we'll also be talking about the freedom from disturbance, or ataraxia.
We'll be diving deeper into three main topics of conversation today. The first is, what is virtue and how does one become virtuous? Which will lead us into our second conversation about virtue as means to eudaimonia, bringing us to our third and final discussion about how, or if, eudaimonia is the ultimate good. But first, a word from one of our sponsors. Today's episode of Behind the Dialogue is brought to you by Long-Ass White Robes. It's this or nothing. Today, I'm sporting a hand-woven linen variety in the color eggshell, and Sextus is rocking the same but in the shade light cream. They're extremely versatile and perfect for any occasion, like practicing your craft, attending a symposium, or taking part in a ritual sacrifice. Find them wherever tunics and cloaks are sold. So, the marketplace? Long-ass white robes. What else would we wear? Firstly, we should cover the basics here. Not everyone listening to this is an expert philosopher like me, or like you. So let's go ahead and define eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is essentially happiness, or at least that's how it's translated, but it means so much more. It means a complete life to the fullest extent. The path to eudaimonia is certainly a sort of activity of the soul, expressing virtue. Although sometimes described as such, it is not a state. One must get there through learning or some sort of path of cultivation. As I said in Nicomachean Ethics, he who is happy lives in accordance with complete virtue and is sufficiently equipped with external goods, not for some chance period, but throughout a complete life.
So now as you talked about eudaimonia, I can give you the basics of what ataraxia is. I like to say that it's just detaching from all things, but also people nowadays may call it a state of serene calmness or a peaceful state of mind / tranquility.
And with that, let's get into it today. Are you ready, Sextus?
I think I'm ready, or I could also not be ready. We'll see.
So, as I mentioned, eudaimonia, or happiness, is achieved over time. How does one achieve this? Well, I'm so glad you asked, Sextus. Eudaimonia is achieved through the habituation of virtuous actions that lead into a virtuous character. Since happiness is an activity of the soul expressing complete virtue, we must examine virtue, for that will perhaps also be a way to study happiness better. There are two kinds of virtue of thought and virtue of character. Virtue of thought, which any man is capable of possessing, is something that is learned. It's something that has to be taught. And virtue of character is a result of those continuous actions based on virtue of thought, developing over time with experience, just like one practices a craft. What are these virtues, you may ask? Well, you've got your courage, your justice, your temperance, yada yada yada. The same stuff we talked about last week with Plato. But we also have vices like shame and fear, and incontinence. How those all will manifest in your actions, I don't know. Don't ask. It's not worth it. But the key to the path of virtue is finding the balance in between the opposites. And while, yes, it's true that we become just simply by doing just actions. We become temperate by doing temperate actions. We become courageous over time as we do courageous actions. Those actions are all relative to the individual. Take, for instance, my buddy Milo. He's a wrestler. He's a big guy, and to fuel his body, he needs more food than I do. This is demonstrating the doctrine of the mean, which I coined. And it exemplifies the fact that there's not a single action that can be prescribed as right for each and every individual person. And the amount of pleasure or pain that may guide someone to choose an action is all relative. And although one person's mean may be another's extreme, the core categories of virtues remain the same.
That was really interesting hearing your perspective. But I'm not going to propose a positive ethical doctrine or endorse a specific conception of eudaimonia or virtue. Instead, my skepticism leads to emphasizing the limitations of human knowledge and the difficulty of making definitive claims about ethical principles. So how do you know everyone around the world would have those innate qualities and isn't just relative to the society that you live in?
Well, that doesn't matter right now. Get your olive branches out, folks. It's democracy time, baby. It's new, it's super hip, straight out of Athens, and it's here to stay. Throw on your long-ass white robe and try it out today. Unless you're under the age of 20, or a slave, or a woman, or any combination of those. We have a good feeling about this one. Pretty sure it'll stick around in this exact unchanging form forever. An average fellow with an untrained mind, who perhaps let his desires consume all of his decision-making, might think that the route to happiness is through wealth, through power or position, success or honor. But he is simple of the mind. I think it's essential here to re-emphasize that eudaimonia is not achieved in one day, and becoming a virtuous person takes repetition. As I so beautifully wrote in Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1, Chapter 7, one swallow does not make a spring, nor does one day. Nor, similarly, does one day or a short time make us blessed and happy. The real route to eudaimonia is, in fact, the transformation and growth that accompanies the repetition of such actions. The transformation that takes you from your first potentiality to your first actuality, and then to your second actuality. It's akin to a young child first studying how to play the piano, learning the keys and their corresponding sounds through his educator's instructions and demonstration. As he practices, he gains an understanding of where to place his hands and which keys will produce desirable melodies when played sequentially. He grows to be able to play any song placed in front of him, and all the while his dexterity improves. He can play by ear now, and his fingers naturally fall where they need to, every time, without so much as a first thought. Now, a maestro, the boy composes his own symphonies. Having reached his second actuality, he retains a complete state of expertise with every flawless score he produces. And now, my dear Sextus, and just substitute the word virtue anytime I mention music. And bada bing, bada boom, you've got yourself some eudaimonia. It's fulfilling and complete, and I just hope you appreciate all the time I just saved you by explicitly clarifying what my metaphor meant. Instead of leaving you in search of an equal and opposite interpretation. So Sextus, how would you suggest someone lives a fulfilled and good life?
The idea of suspension of judgment is a way to achieve tranquility, or ataraxia. Tranquility is simply the feeling of peace of mind, like I said, and it cannot be happiness in the sense of flourishing that you may describe. But as I stated in PH1, Chapter 8, of what is the goal of sexism, the one who believes that something is honorable or bad by nature will be disturbed, and the man who determines nothing in regard to things honorable or bad by nature does not flee or go after them excessively. I'm not going to deny that the skeptic will be faced with troubles, but by suspending the belief, you can escape and avoid this distress, and in this way, become more happy. By neither affirming nor denying beliefs, individuals avoid the mental distress that can arise from contradictory or uncertain positions. By cultivating this state of tranquility through suspension of judgment, individuals can navigate the complexities of life without being disturbed by conflicting beliefs or opinions.
So why does this all matter? Well, for as I stated in Chapter 1, Book 1, Happiness of Nicomachean Ethics, every craft and every investigation, and likewise every action and decision, seems to aim at some good. Hence, the good has been well described as that at which everything aims. The question that we're attempting to answer today about how to live a good life is essentially, what is the purpose? What is our purpose as humans? And I've concluded that the purpose is eudaimonia. Every action, craft, or activity has some end good in mind, whether it's the activity itself or a product of that activity. Everything has an end goal. But if you look closer, every purpose of a desired outcome leads to something else. Let's say that if by profession I was a shipbuilder instead of philosopher, my activity would be building a boat. The final product or desired outcome would be that boat. But that boat being in a final and complete state of boatiness does not mean we've reached the end here. That boat's activity is to transport something from one place to another across a body of water. We can continue this chain on and on and on again. This just goes to show there is always a desired outcome from each product. There's always a pursuit after pursuit after pursuit. But eudaimonia is final and self-sufficient. The desired outcome leads nowhere but itself. Eudaimonia is the ultimate good. To prove this, let me recount a puzzle from Nicomachean Ethics, Book 1. Suppose, then, that there is some end of the things we pursue in our actions, which we wish for because of itself, and because of which we wish for the other things. And we do not choose everything because of something else, since, if we do, it will go on without limit, making desire empty and futile. Then clearly, this end will be the good, i.e., the best good. Since our soul's activity is the cumulation of our virtuous actions, it is clear that our function is the completion of such activity. So completing our function, fulfilling our purpose, is the only way to live a good life and flourish. So Sextus, how do you disagree with that?
I believe that our beliefs and opinions often lead to inner conflicts and disturbances. By suspending judgment and refusing to affirm or deny any proposition, individuals can attain a state of mental tranquility. This suspension of judgment extends to all areas of life, including ethical, metaphysical questions. It's important to understand that every argument can be opposed by an equal argument. Like I stated in the modes in chapter 27, they urge this on the skeptic so that he will not be led astray by the dogmatist and give up his skeptical mode of investigation and lose his freedom from disturbance. Evaluative beliefs inevitably cause worry and psychological distress. Therefore, in order to alleviate distress, one should suspend these beliefs. Psychological distress is caused by dogmatizing because of the nature of belief and how that relates to our concerns. And the only way to alleviate that distress is by purging oneself of these beliefs.
Okay, Sextus, if you say so, but I don't think stress is the sole thing preventing us from living a good life. But I've sat quietly back this entire time and let you attempt to dismantle my belief that living with virtue is essential to living a good life, and thus to achieving eudaimonia. So, I'd like a chance to push back. The mental tranquility or freedom from disturbance, as you are suggesting, to me, does not seem to indicate a life well lived. There's much more to a good life than simply peace and quiet. Don't get me wrong, I think peace of the mind can be a great thing, but it doesn't account for a sense of fulfillment, a sense of purpose. I mean, sure, suspending judgment can alleviate some stress from your life, but it cannot provide that warm feeling in your soul that takes over when life is just good, when you're surrounded by good friends, you're proud of who you are, what you stand for, and what you've done, and plain and simply, you're happy. And if my notion of eudaimonia can give you those things, do you really believe that mental tranquility is all that? And look, Sextus, I get your shtick. I know you don't want to dogmatically state that eudaimonia is the end-all be-all of the human purpose, but can you not concede that as individuals in a society, doing good or virtuous things and trying to have a positive impact on society beckons with it some fulfillment, while benefiting your life and the lives of others around you? Would that not make you happy?
Fine. I just can't wrap my head around the fact that merely the intention of doing good things will correlate to having a positive impact on society. Who's to say that helping others or doing good things around you will also make you or others around you just as happy?
Okay, Sextus, agree to disagree, but that's our time for today. Always a pleasure to hear from you.
Who's to say if it was a pleasure? Or for that matter, what pleasure even is?
All right, and that's where we have to cut it. Do. Has it been 4 years already? Yes, it has. So you know what that means. It's Olympics time. That's right, get ready for non-stop action and fun for the whole family. Unless you're a family of slaves, or a woman, or both. So strip off that long-ass white robe, whip out your javelins, and start tussling, man to man, with the Olympics. Thanks for listening. This is Behind the Dialogues. This is NPR.